Top of the middle of the day to you boys and girls. We're at the bench in the shop for another little narrative session, but first, right out of the gate, let's take a moment of silence for all the people in the West that have been getting hammered with the fires this year. It's been pretty horrific with carnage and destruction. So with that, those of us on the periph get to hope and pray that those that are in the middle of the carnage and destruction don't get too down in the mouth through this holiday season. There's a lot of people that have lost everything. California especially has been getting hard hit. I know of a couple guys personally in the Paradise area that lost everything but the shirts on their back. And so, yeah, I don't even know what to say. I guess we can just hope and pray that something good comes out of this. They don't get too down in the mouth through the holiday season. We utilized one of the 9 options through PayPal to donate. I verified that it was a non-profit organization, which is pretty sweet. I guess us on the periph also, if we are able, get the opportunity to help with that aspect, which, I mean, actually felt kind of good personally to try to do a little bit to help them out. But anyway, so pretty somber session, I'm afraid, but that's the way it goes sometimes in this life. We're dealing with the narrative at the bench, so throwing out the disclaimers. This is going to be long and tedious if you're not a knuckle/gearhead like myself. If you are, you might find it interesting, enjoyable, and possibly informative. But if you are not that type, you've been warned technically. The other side of that is I'm going to try to pull everything from the depths of my cobweb-infested cranium, so please forgive me if I slur and or stammer my speech. I call that slammering, of course. Through this process, check the description for any clarifications and or qualifications. And yeah, so I guess here we go. So for your viewing pleasure, on the right hand side of the bench we have an ms661 standard saw, and on the left side we have the m-tronic. Now I checked the IPL, at least the one that I have, shows 3 different options for the tank. The only difference between the 2 that are in my IPL was a couple of additional placards that are on the m-tronic version from the standard. I also note that the m-tronic version came with a 3/4 wrap handlebar. The standard came with a half wrap handlebar, and I noticed that the tank didn't have the chain guide on it, the aluminum piece that keeps the tank from getting annihilated if you throw the chain. But these are interchangeable as far as bolting up to the tank itself. I only saw 2 choices for case halves, one for the flywheel side, one for the drive side. So 1 set of cases, 1 crank, 1 oil pump, 5 different drum choices. Only 1 was spline though, so you could interchange the rims. The rest of them were the spur style. I didn't really look too much further than that other than the visual aspect. So if we're on the tank, I did remove the handle molding, and we're going to take a look. This is the switch shaft right here. It also actuates the choke via this lever right here. One thing we'll notice, it has this little shaft, I guess, technically. So you apply the choke on the m-tronic saw, and when you squeeze the trigger, it actually kicks the choke off. That was one differential that I noticed right there. If we look at the standard version, we'll see that that is not the way it is set up, although it has the little hole in there, so you could put that rod onto this choke, trigger level, which makes sense. So then the switch shaft's got a little bit different configuration for the choke, essentially. If you pull the trigger, it doesn't do anything with the switch shaft. So with that being said, the differential is there's a little rod that works on the standard version that actuates the choke shaft. You're not able to do anything adjustment-wise on the m-tronic. They're saving you from yourself and doing it for you with those particular saws. So I didn't notice anything different about the cylinder cover and the air cleaner cover. If you're looking at them, I didn't see anything different. I didn't even check the IPL. I'm going to make the assumption that they're exactly the same. One thing I did notice is this is a little bit older saw, the standard version as far as I could tell, and we do have a differential with the color of the, I think this is a cartridge style. It feels exactly the same in both. Who knows, maybe they ran out of black dye, but we definitely have a running change because this is a fairly new 661 m-tronic saw. Just something that I found was kind of interesting. Carb box covers, no differential whatsoever. We do have a grommet differential. The standard saw, you can adjust the carburetor, the high, the low, and the throttle, where the m-tronic you cannot. There is a third choice, which I'm assuming that has something to do with the Arctic version. There's some kind of recess over here, but I couldn't really tell exactly. You can see it's probably for a switch though, running the Arctic version. If we look underneath all of that, we have the carburetors. So one thing we'll look at real quick is the butterfly on, well, we're going to have to show you how this works. So you can't actually engage the choke unless you actuate the throttle trigger. So you have to actually stab the trigger before you can apply the choke. In the standard and the m-tronic, they're consistent. So this would be the standard version. It has a different color plastic piece right here. The carburetor itself is a little bit taller. The body itself, the bolt pattern is the same. The choke butterflies themselves are actually different. You can run the m-tronic for a long time. I've done it for a minute, resetting things personally, but you can see there's definitely a difference. m-tronic, standard, thought that was kind of interesting. There's the servo, which does the metering. You get, there's the stops. In the standard version where you can adjust the needles, this has about an, I think it was like about 18.5 millimeter venturi. I think the m-tronic came in at about 19, so there seemed to be a little bit of a differential. I thought that was kind of noteworthy. If we look at the intake manifolds, there's definitely a difference. I think the early m-tronic saws came with this version, but then they had some trouble with the way they were running. I think the fuel was pooling up or something, and that's just kind of what I heard through the process. And so then they switched it to a little bit more straight shot version. But they both have, I'm hoping you can see those, the ridges in there with their little pyramid shaped pieces in there that are rough, and they're atomizing the fuel with those. If we look at how those are supported, the washer and the keeper, they're both the same in the saws, so not really anything important to talk about there. The cylinders are the same, so we'll just look at this one, round, where it goes into the cylinder, switches to oval as it comes out. We've looked at this cylinder before a little bit. We're going to hopefully get some light in the subject there. I'm hoping you can see the exhaust ports are really wide, so it's going to evacuate the spent gases off the top of the piston fairly well, I think. We've kind of talked about the shape of the transfer ports. They're actually positioned like this in the cylinder. I'm hoping that we can maybe see down in there and see how the shape of it is. Hopefully you can see that in there. Take a little bit of time running it around. But anyway, so as the piston is going down, the transfer ports actually open on the outside edges of the cylinder, and they open up this direction as the piston goes down. Now it's a pretty swoopy straight shot on the back loop. On the front loop it's more of a 90. Now this is a 1 series 661. 461 is a similar design, it's just a smaller bore. And what they're doing with these is it's kind of an entry-level stratification process, if you will. So what they're trying to do, or what they tried to do with these saws, the 661, 461, is they're trying to use the exhaust gases as the barrier, as opposed to the stratification process with the raw air, like the 362 and the 462, for example. So it was relatively easy to get a saw that was a little bit cleaner burning on the market, not a lot of R&D and complete changing necessarily. The cases were changed, of course, but it wasn't quite as involved as a full-on strato saw, if you will. So essentially, if we come back around, we're using, because of the way the transfer ports are shaped, we're trying to utilize some of the spent exhaust gases that actually go back in to the transfer ports, create a little bit of a barrier, so it takes a little bit longer for the raw charge to get out across the top of the piston. So with the scavenging effect, it's trying to draw it out through the exhaust. Hopefully there's less of that happening. That is the premise for the design and the shape, configuration, placement, the whole concept of the transfer ports. I don't think we went into that quite in as much detail. We kind of didn't look at the front side of the exhaust port. It is rectangular. It is smaller than the 660. It is actually smaller, the opening, than the 461, even though it's a lot more displacement. So that's interesting. If we look at the wrist pin bearings, they're the same. The wrist pins themselves are the same. I do like the size of the needles. They are very big. They're, I think, about 80 thousandths. I actually appreciate the way they've designed that part of the application. There's nothing different with the pistons. They're 56 millimeter. They're exactly the same. So I guess we won't really talk too much about that. If we look at the mufflers themselves, we'll see we have this diffuser channeling the exhaust a little bit. It's the same in both. We see that the standard version has a hole about this big around going out. It's exactly the same size and in the same location in the m-tronic saw. The difference is it comes with a fire screen. They're made out of stainless. They're actually really lightweight, but you can see same idea. Well, I didn't actually measure the holes. It actually looks like the hole in the m-tronic saw might be a little bit bigger. It's about can't quite get my calipers all the way in there. 64 in the m-tronic versus about 58 or something in the standard, so maybe it is a little bit smaller. It looks a little bit smaller visually, seems to measure a little bit smaller. Again, we review on the carburetors. We mentioned that the venturi size in the standard is a little bit smaller than in the m-tronic, so there you go. The casings are exactly the same in both saws, and they're also made out of stainless. So the muffler's really lightweight. They use smaller bolts on the, they use 5 mils on the bottom holding them in. They use some really long ones holding them onto the cylinder. The cooling plates are made out of aluminum now, pretty small and lightweight, fiber style gasket, similar to what Husqvarna has been doing for years and years and years, probably because it weighs less. If we take a look in the crankcase itself, on the m-tronic, we see that it has the aluminum flange. We kind of talked about that before. It's directing the flow from underneath the dome of the piston out toward the front. Here's the start of the transfer port circuit right here in the front. So it's trying to direct the flow from underneath the dome, stuff it directionally toward the front so it can charge the transfer port circuit. The flywheel appears to be the same. There were a couple different choices actually. The m-tronic in the IPL shows one version. I'm assuming that the other version in the IPL was for the standard, even though they look the same. There's probably some kind of a difference since we're not running an m-tronic coil, but they both have the dual magnet system going on, so I'm thinking that we're monitoring the speed of the crank that way. At least in the m-tronic, that's how we know how to monitor, or excuse me, how to add the fuel, I guess, change the servo height, which is allowing more or less fuel. We can see that there's two wires, and they're really tiny. Actually, you got to be careful you don't break these things, tear them in half. We have a hot and a off, hot and a cold, technically, positive and negative. But we have two spades, different number on the m-tronic coil. If we take a look at the standard version, we're going to look in the crankcase again. It's identical. Again, we use the same wrist pin bearing. We have the same flange, same directional stuffing process which is going on. If we take a look at the flywheel again, dual magnet situation going on, but we have a single spades and, like I said, a different part number. Limited coil, but not running the m-tronic process. So I think that's about it from the peanut gallery here. We kind of ran through this pretty quickly, but most of it's not really contrasting. Oh, we did not discuss a couple things on the bench, so we're gonna go into the recoil assemblies, or pull starter covers if you will. The standard versions on top, m-tronics on the bottom. They are the same mechanically and physically. The only differential is the placard, which denotes which saw you have, which makes sense from a manufacturing point of view. If we look at the clutch covers, the half wrap version comes with this one on the bottom. It does have captive nuts where you can take them apart and off. On the m-tronic version, at least the one that I'm dealing with, skeletonized dogs are quite a bit bigger. I call this the big kid clutch cover. I guess industry standard for super awesome, if you will, is the Stihl style, where it actually cants away from the cases as it comes out. I don't understand why some of the other outfits haven't plagiarized that, because that's awesome. If you want to talk about chip management anyway, if we look inside, we'll see that the dust flap in the big kid clutch cover is much larger than the half wrap version. So if we, I guess, look at it from this perspective, the big kid clutch cover is badder in every way imaginable. So anyway, almost forgot. Thankfully I didn't. Anyway, I think I've kind of covered the gambit here. And carb box, they seem to be exactly the same. The wiring harness is obviously different in the m-tronic saw, but we have all the little recesses cast in here where you can put the m-tronic wiring into the standard version. I can't imagine that they made a different carb box. That doesn't make sense from a manufacturing point of view. So I think we kind of got everything covered at this stage. We're doing a lot more work to this saw. We're actually going to run a different piston in it. I'm going to try to really put the hurt on the combustion chamber shape. And this one's going to get the Insano SS, which is the first level of combustion chamber work. This is going to get the Psycho SS. I guess I'd be curious to see how these two saws pan out in the end. I I think that's about it. So anyway, again, we get the opportunity, being on the periph, to keep those that are suffering and will be suffering and have suffered due to all the fire activity in the West. We can keep those people in our thoughts and in our prayers as well. And as we go into the holiday season, I guess the more we do that, the better it will be for them. Anyway, thanks for watching this session. I hope that wherever you might be on God's green earth, that you're having a blessed day.